Hall and determination of quorum. Whoever's not here, say aye. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nordstrom. Here. Solomon. Here. Roberts. Here. Stroman. Here. Armstrong. Here. Jones. Here. Lehman. Here. Ham.
Here, remote.
Evans. Here. Roseland. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, we will have the invocation by Pastor Randy Brock, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Let's pray together. Father, we begin by asking for your wisdom. As many decisions will be made tonight, God, we know that you are watching us and that you are taking care of us. So thank you for that. But Lord, I take this opportunity just to ask a blessing over our mayor, Lord Jesus, Steve Allender. He has served this community faithfully, and his leadership, Lord God, has been a pleasure to see. And I just thank you, Lord, for him and for our elections coming up, Lord, all of those up and down the ballot. Good people who said yes. Few do. But, Lord God, there are many here that have. And so, Lord, I pray blessing over them. And we believe very strongly, Lord God, that your will be done through the people of Rapid City, because we are praying for your will to be done here on earth, just as you taught us, just as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is the adoption of the agenda. This is where the council may adopt the agenda as written or make certain alterations to it. Would there be a motion? Motion to approve by Jones, second by Armstrong. All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 1 on the agenda tonight is a presentation. It's an informational presentation on the utility rate study. And we'll go to Kristen Hasse, the Assistant Public Works Director.
Thank you, Mayor. You will remember that last year in November, we entered into a professional service agreement with HDR to conduct a water and water reclamation utility rate study. Currently, data is being collected and analyzed, and we are also developing the schedule for that utility rate study. We are now at the point where we are preparing to coordinate with the Utility Rate Committee, which some of you are members of, as well as city staff are part of that committee. Tonight I have Sean Corn here from HDR, and he will provide an overview of the study itself and the process which we will go through.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening. Thank you. So this evening, as Kristen mentioned, we'll walk through the overall process of establishing cost-based water and water reclamation rates. So as we kick off the study, we always want to think about what are our key goals and objectives. And part of this is prudently funding our annual operating and capital expenses, so the ongoing maintenance and replacement of the existing infrastructure to provide service to your customers. Thinking about the impact of future system demands and growth on the system and how that impacts the overall capital funding plan and meeting those service needs as the system expands and grows. And as we go through this, a key element will be the cost of service analysis that I'll explain here in a little bit, but thinking about your customer classes of service or those rate schedules and how we develop specific rates for each of those rate schedules to reflect how those customers impact the system, and then ultimately develop equitable and cost-based rates based on generally accepted cost of service principles. As part of this, we have an expanded outreach and communication. So for those of you that were here for the study about 5 years ago, this is a continuation of that process where we do have public outreach meetings built into this process towards the tail end of the study as we reach out to the community to present this information. Then we also have presentations to the City Council and, as mentioned, the Utility Rate Committee. We also have written documentation of this study that goes along with this process. So to kick off the study overall, as I mentioned, our goals, the key goal here is to develop a set of revenue projections to adequately fund our operating and capital needs. And we think about this over a multi-year period. Short term, 0 to 5 years for our rate setting process. Long term, 6 to 10 years to make sure we're not missing anything that's coming up in the future that we should start planning for today. That's generally related around our overall capital plan, some of the major projects or improvements that are necessary to maintain the system. As we go through this process, we base this on generally accepted methodology. So you'll see 2 pictures of books here. This is the Water Environment Federation Manual Practice number 27 and the American Water Works Association M1 Manual, which outline the approaches and methods that should be used to establish cost-based rates. As those manuals talk about, we need to go through and develop equitable rates to your customers. So thinking about each of the different classes again and how they're impacted. As we develop the study, we also need to keep in mind prudent financial planning criteria. So that includes items such as maintaining adequate debt service coverage ratios. So that's essentially the credit check of each of the utilities for existing debt that is outstanding from prior infrastructure that's been funded or financed through long-term borrowing, as well as looking forward to determine what those impacts may be from additional borrowings needed to maintain the system. So as we go through this process, we'll be working with that utility rate group and then bringing that information back to the council as we develop those plans to ultimately complete the study. Another key element is thinking about our minimum reserve balances and maintaining sufficient reserves should there be emergency situations, unexpected capital needs, or meeting and minimizing impacts to rates over the long term. So in order to do that, we go through a comprehensive rate study, and we do this on a standalone basis for each of the enterprise funds, the water and the water reclamation enterprise funds. And it includes 3 steps: a revenue requirement, which is essentially, think of that as your financial plan. What's that look like over the next 5 to 10 years for funding of that O&M and capital expenses? And then what are the overall adjustments to revenues necessary to support those expenses? Next is our cost of service analysis. This is where we distribute those costs, the revenue requirement, between each of the rate schedules or customer classes of service. So this looks at how each customer type or rate schedule is impacting the system and the facilities that are required to provide them service. So think about a single family home, their water consumption and wastewater generation versus a large commercial customer. It's a different level of service that's provided based on their overall average day needs for water, peak day needs for water, and then the strength of that wastewater for the water reclamation side. And the higher the strength, the harder it is to treat or more costly it is to treat. So this analysis looks at each class to determine what those impacts are. Once we know the overall adjustment to revenues and how we should collect that from each customer class or rate schedule, then we can design rates. This thinks about the structure or how you charge your customers through the fixed charge and the variable charge, and the level of each of those rates for fixed or variable charges to recover the target revenue we've identified. So on the revenue requirement, as I've mentioned, we just simply look at that financial plan to meet our financial parameters, our funding criteria, our operating and capital expenses to determine that overall revenue need. As I mentioned, we focus in on the next 5 years for that rate setting period, but look out over a longer term to make sure we're not missing anything. I think about this as like we're driving down the road. We're looking up ahead of us to make sure we don't miss that corner, miss that stop sign, and make sure we're able to plan for that adjustment. I mentioned the standalone basis. So in this case, the Water Enterprise Fund and the Water Reclamation Enterprise Fund, we develop them so water revenues fund water costs. They stay there. Wastewater, water reclamation costs and revenues stay over here so that rates adequately support the overall costs of each of the enterprise funds, which is essentially your definition of an enterprise fund. We do use what's known as the cash basis methodology. If there's any accountants in the room or watching, this is essentially just looking on an annual basis to match up nicely to your budgeting process. So thinking about what our revenues are, what our expenses are, what that difference is at the end of each of those years and funding the overall needs of each utility. So as we get into the study and we come back with the utility rate committee and we come back to council, there may be key policy decisions that we need to think about and bring forward to gain direction on. Some of those may be how we meet our financial policies. That may be, are we meeting our debt service coverage ratio or are we not? We need to adjust revenues more or less. Maybe meeting our fund balances or how we're financing or funding our overall capital improvement projects. We also want to focus in on how we're funding annual renewal and replacement needs. So this is a funding component of the capital plan, and it's the reinvestment in the system. It's the putting the new tires on the car, it's painting the house, the new roof. It's the things that have to happen from time to time and annually to maintain the systems as we go forward. As we think about the long-term projections, we think about the levels of service, how we're dealing with additional O&M costs or increasing O&M costs over the long term. That may be through preventative maintenance programs to maintain the infrastructure you have in place today. It may be impacts of growth on your customer base and expansion of the system. It may be looking at those additional programs or practices that may be necessary in the long term, whether that's an O&M, an operation and maintenance expense, or a capital type program that's necessary as you go forward. So we're trying to encompass all these necessary needs out into the future. What we've seen over the last several years on the consumption side is pretty unique. So from a billing perspective and a revenue generation, we're evaluating what those overall consumption levels are for billing for water and water reclamation to develop a revenue profile that reflects what our projected assumptions are going forward. And that's important as we think about how we develop our revenue plan and our overall customer growth impacts. So once we know the revenue requirement, we go into our cost of service analysis. Now, the cost of service analysis is a method to equitably distribute the revenue requirement to each customer class of service or rate schedule. We need an approach or methodology to do this because you and nor do any other utilities capture costs specifically by residential customers or multifamily or industrial or commercial. We have a network of pipes, pumps, treatment processes that are necessary to provide service that meet all the needs of the customers. So the cost of service analysis goes through and evaluates, as I mentioned earlier, on the water side, customer classes, average day need, peak day need, customer related costs to come back to the cost to serve them. On the water reclamation side, it looks at the overall volume of wastewater generated, the strength of that wastewater generated, and the customer related components. So in that way, we can come back and proportionally distribute the cost based on the amount of impact each customer class has on the system. So as an example, if the single family class is 60% of the total annual consumption on the system or our average day needs, they would be allocated and distributed 60% of the total costs that are allocated to that average day component. So we're thinking about how each class impacts the system and what their needs are. The purpose of this is that it's generally accepted as fair and equitable. So we're coming back to those terms of providing that level of service. It also tells us if there's any subsidies where one class of service or rate schedule is not paying their share of the cost based on how they impact the system. At the end of the cost of service, we end up with average unit costs or cost per unit of billing for water or sewer or cost per equivalent meter that ultimately provide our basis for establishing rates. So as we think about the policy issues or concerns that we need to think about on the cost of service side to develop cost-based and equitable rates, we need to think about those projected consumption or volume levels for water or water reclamation. What's that look like into the future based on what we know going backwards and looking at those consumption patterns? What is that peak consumption or those strength levels? How do they impact the water and water reclamation system? We're also taking a dive into the current customer classes or those rate schedules that you have in place today to make sure they reflect consistent consumption characteristics. So we're allocating and distributing costs to an appropriate group. And then we want to make sure we don't have any subsidies as we go into our rate design component. So once we know that cost of service, then we're going to go into rate design. And that rate design is really based on the overall revenue needs of the entire system, so for water or water reclamation, and then the cost of service results for each of those utilities. And that provides us the basis to establish rates. As I mentioned, then we go into our rate structure component on how we charge the customers through that fixed and volumetric or variable component to develop the final rate structure approach. As we get into this, we'll be talking about what are the city's goals and objectives for the rate structure. Many of these are kind of self-evident as we go through the process, such as revenue sufficiency. But we also have revenue stability, where we think about how our rate structure is going to impact with changing number of customers or changing levels of consumption. Maybe it's a real dry year or a real wet year. How does that impact our overall revenue levels over the long term? We want these to be easy to understand and easy to administer if they're any different from the rate schedules you have in place today. We want to make sure that customers understand why their bill is what it is, and then ultimately your staff can come back and explain that to customers when they have questions or concerns. We will, and as part of this, are evaluating an affordability component. So looking at the average bill, how does that impact some of your affordability customers that may have affordability issues, thinking about efficient use or conservation, and then the last two, we want to maintain equitable and non-discriminatory or cost-based rates, as well as being legally defendable. So as we think about the policy considerations, really this is looking at, from past discussions, is thinking about the revenue stability and sufficiency, thinking about those conservation impacts. What are those programs that you have in place today? How do we develop those cost-based rates? So we'll be working with the staff project team as well as the utility rate committee to come back and develop those overall goals that will then ultimately be brought forward for the final recommendations of the study. We also are going to think about the fixed versus variable charges. So looking at what that monthly fixed per meter size is, or the demand side on the water reclamation, and then how we recover those costs between those two components. For single-family customers, there's a tiered rate structure. And so we're going to look at those tiers, the size or the difference between the tiers, as well as the pricing of those, to make sure that those reflect your typical customer characteristics and reflect those goals and objectives that we have. So as we go through this, we'll develop alternative rate structures. We'll provide those comparisons to that current rate structure, as well as to other surrounding agencies and utilities for water and water reclamation, and develop the overall approach. So next steps on this, as Kristen mentioned, we're going through and developing the technical analysis. We're working with the staff project team at this point to go through the final data needs and develop the initial aspects of the comprehensive rate study. We're getting ready to work with the utility rate committee to talk through the initial process and establishment of cost-based rates. And then we're ultimately going to develop those draft recommendations with city staff, go through the utility rate committee, we'll finalize those technical analyses, and then we'll present that information and recommendations to the council. And during that time, we'll also be doing our public outreach and communication on the overall process, establishment of rates, and recommended proposed rates moving forward. From a time schedule perspective, the technical analysis that's ongoing, that'll go through somewhere around September is our goal right now. We're working with the utility rate committee the same time, May through September, and then in October and November, we'd be back in front of you all to present those study recommendations, and then at the same time putting together the outreach and communication. So in closing, really this is a continuation of the city's process of establishing cost-based and equitable rates. As I mentioned, we did the study about 5-6 years ago. You've done studies roughly every 5 years or so, and this is a continuation of that process to maintain rates at adequate levels to support the needs of your customers and provide water and water reclamation services. And with that, I will turn it back over to the mayor and council for any questions anybody may have.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just for the council to be aware, this is an informational presentation only and no actions required tonight. And it looks like we have no questions, so. Oh, okay, we have one comment from Bill Evans.
So I heard you mention the word emergency. Are there any plans to include rate structures to accommodate something that might happen? Say, I mean, the dam breaks in an earthquake. How does that affect the rate structure for the water supply? Or, say, one of these mines that aren't gonna happen up in our watershed strikes a mean vein and we can't source out water anymore. How would that affect the rate structure going forward? Because I think those are real emergencies, and one in particular, maybe more than others. But are you going to include any of that kind of stuff?
Maybe not to that extreme. And I only say that just because as we're going through the study process, we're looking at what may be the component on the system that could go bump in the middle of the night. We lose a pump station or a lift station, or we have a major system failure at the treatment plants, one or the other of those two. And what would the cash on hand need to be to meet those needs? Something as dramatic as what you're talking about, maybe dramatic wasn't the right word, but extensive as what you're saying, I'm not sure we could plan for that. But I think the smaller emergency situations is what we were really focused on as part of that. Last study, we did look at a couple scenarios of if we lost a major, large water user, what would that do to our revenues? So we'd look at different situations like that, but not necessarily losing an entire supply source as part of that. But that's something we can kick around with staff to see if that's something we can quantify as part of this.
Well, the only reason I asked, and this, I guess, is well, I guess the only reason I asked is because we did pass a resolution and we talked about such things happening. And since we're spending money for a study, it might be wise to include that so we have some justification for our stand as a council. Okay?
Got it. Understand. Thank you.
Okay, Laura Armstrong.
Just a quick request. Can you share this presentation with us?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Okay, that looks like all from the council. Thank you very much for being here tonight and for the information.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to the agenda. Next, general public comment. We don't have any general public comment speaker requests tonight, so we'll move on to non-public hearing items 2 through 44. We will not have any speaker requests for items 2 through 36, so they will go to consent then, items 2 through 36. John Roberts.
I gotta pull item 6 because I need to abstain from it.
Okay, are there any other items the council wishes to pull from consent? Seeing none then, I'd entertain a motion to approve consent with the exception of item 6. Motion Lehman. Second Nordstrom. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6, tax increment district set for hearing. A request by Indigo Design LLC for a resolution to create a tax increment financing district and resolution to adopt a project plan for property generally described as being located south of East Omaha, west of Campbell Street. Motion to approve Lehman, second Solomon. All in favor except for Mr. Roberts say aye. Opposed? Motion carries with one abstention. That takes us through consent. Non-consent items 37 through 44. We have one speaker request on item 39, so we'll open the public comment period and call to the podium Derek, is it Burgad? Yes. You have 3 minutes tonight to address the council, sir, on this item.
Thank you, Council. I was here a couple of weeks ago during the zoning commission meeting, and I just had a couple of concerns that I wanted heard. I have no issues with the rezoning request. I am perfectly fine with that. But I did have some concerns that I feel that the city should know about and possibly address. The first of all being, we're talking about Patricia Street. However, if you look on every map that you can find, it's known as Big Sky Drive, which makes it very difficult to have anything delivered to your house. And I worry that in the event of an emergency, we may be going to the wrong street. So I feel like somebody should probably make a decision and figure out the difference between Big Sky Drive and Patricia Street. The second item of note, and it became more apparent over the weekend with the 3 inches of rain we got, is there are no sewer drains anywhere on Chet Street nor on Patricia. And the closest ones that I can locate are well down on DeGeese Avenue. That is a lot of water with nowhere to go. The third item of note is with the extension of Patricia and Neal Street, what is the city going to do for traffic control devices? Right now, DeGeese is becoming increasingly more dangerous with the rates of speed at travel, and opening these roads and putting more people into this area, I feel are just going to increase the danger in the area without substantial traffic control devices being put in place. And the last item of note is I have walked my little dog all over the valley. What I have not found yet is any kind of park or any kind of green space, and I was wondering if the city was doing anything to address any kind of parks out in the valley or green spaces for dogs to run, stuff like that. That is all I had. Thanks, council.
Well, thank you. Thank you for keeping an eye on your neighborhood. Okay, then that'll close the public comment period, and we'll start under ordinances with item number 37. Approve the second reading of ordinance 6567 regarding supplemental appropriation number 2 for 2023. Motion to approve Nordstrom. Second by Mr. Jones. All in favor of approval of item 37, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 38, approve the first reading of ordinance 6573, an ordinance amending the code to remove redundant language or sections, fix certain typographical errors, and update obsolete language regarding persons with disabilities. Motion to approve Solomon, and who was the second? Pat Roseland with the second. All in favor of approval of item 38, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 39, approve the first reading of ordinance 6568, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by Indigo Design LLC for DTH LLC for a rezoning request from office commercial to medium density residential district for property generally described as being located west of the terminus of Patricia Street. And we'll go to Bill Evans.
I just want to make a couple comments to the speaker. I remember the council voting on that Patricia Street change because it happened to be the mother of the developer. And so it was done officially from the dais, and maybe that needs to be updated someplace because we did do that officially here. And with regard to your second question is, yes, we are actively pursuing a couple of green space projects out there right now. So hopefully they'll work out. Thank you.
Okay, ready to entertain a motion on item 39? Motion by Armstrong, second by Evans. All right, all those in favor of approving item 39, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 40, approve first reading ordinance 6569. And I've been informed that this particular item was continued at the Planning Commission, which means essentially that this will need to be continued by the City Council tonight to the June 20th, 2023 meeting. We have a motion to do that by Laura Armstrong and a second by Nordstrom. So the motion is to move item 40 to June 20th. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Public Works Committee items, item 41, authorize staff to advertise for bid for the southeast area trunk sewer reconstruction, Elm Avenue to St. Francis Street. Estimated cost $7.1 million. Motion to approve Nordstrom, second Lehman. We'll go to Bill Evans.
I'd just like to comment on why I voted against this at Public Works. This project is in the area where we've had homes flooding ever since the mid-1970s. For, I know, 12 years, Richie has been trying to address it. I have for the last 4, to get a project going where these homes are no longer flooded or perhaps moved or whatever. And we're approving a plan here that involves those very homes, asking the people to close their street and everything. And yet when the project, this particular phase of the project is finished, their houses will still flood. I was out of town this weekend. I don't know if you got a cloud burst. Normally I go down there and watch the houses go underwater. So I'm going to vote against this because I think we should augment this plan or amend the plan some way that it includes, even if it's a temporary fix for these homes, so they don't keep on getting flooded year after year after month after year. I mean, I wouldn't put up with it if I were a citizen. I don't think anybody on the council would either. So I'm going to vote against this because I think we can do better. Thank you.
Okay, Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of comments in support of the motion is that this is probably, and since I've been on the city council, it's only had water running across the yards, and we did have one neighbor with water running through the house. They just opened up the front door and opened up the back door, and the water ran through. So they were able to accommodate the issue, but it's only happened once, maybe 3 times over the total 4 years that I've been involved with this. And then this project is also going to undertake some mitigation for the water divergent that is on the basically on the surface, and we're going to be addressing the sanitary sewer side of it to take care of an old infrastructure for the sanitary sewer side. There will be a little bit of an addition, and I'll yield to the Public Works Director to get a little bit more into the detail of that, but essentially there is a little bit of additional work that's going to be done to relieve some of that water that Mr. Evans is referring to. So I can yield to the Public Works Director if need be. Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have. And I'm supporting the motion.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to approve. We don't have a motion yet. Item 41, we would entertain a motion. Motion to approve by Armstrong, second by Lehman. We'll have to go to a roll call because we have a call in tonight, and there's going to be at least one no vote, so let's have a roll call.
Jones? Yes. Aye. Lehman? Aye. Solomon? Aye. Evans?
No.
Roseland? Aye. Nordstrom? Aye. Ham?
Aye.
Roberts? Aye. Stroman?
Aye.
Armstrong? Motion passes 9-1.
Okay, thank you. Item number 42, authorize amendment to the general conditions for Public Works construction to allow the Public Works Director to approve of interim change orders that decrease cost, do not affect cost, or increase cost no more than the limits set in SDCL 5-18B-19. Motion to approve by Nordstrom. Is there a second? By Roseland. Okay, and we'll go to Pat Jones.
We had a good thank you, Mayor. We had good discussion on this at Legal and Finance the other day. Personally, I can support this, 2/3 of this. I can support the Public Works Director being allowed to approve change orders that are deductions or that are no cost, but I don't like the idea of increases in change orders not coming to the council. It has nothing to do with the Public Works Director or Public Works Department or anything like that. It has to do with our ability as council members to track and follow projects that are going on and be able to put our eyes on projects and know if the cost is going up or down or that kind of thing. If there's a way for this to proceed and us still be kept in the loop on a regular basis, then I would be open for discussion on that. But I can't support it the way it is. I think it allows approval, the limits set in the SDCL notation there, I think is too high, and I can't support it as is. I would hope there would be some recommendation about how we can move forward with this in another way. I'll reserve my time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg Stroman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to agree with Mr. Jones on this. I would like to have some additional notification if we're talking about change order that gets to be $250,000 under the statute that's cited there, SDCL 5-18B-19, sub 3, and then there's subparagraphs A, B, and C. A is for contracts less than $500,000, the greater of $25,000 or 15% of the base contract, which could be up to $75,000. Under sub B, it says for contracts greater than $500,000 but less than or equal to $2.5 million, the greater of $75,000 or 10% of the base contract. Now it's up to $250,000 that could go without any additional information to the council. And then the last one, sub C, says for contracts greater than $2.5 million, and so many of our contracts are huge anymore because everything costs so much. The greater of $250,000 or 5% of the base contract, and that's $125,000. So I guess the way it looks right now is we could be basically not being informed if there's a change order up to $250,000, and I'm not comfortable with that. So I am comfortable with having some sort of leeway given here, but with these amounts in this statute, I'm not comfortable, and I would like to see some sort of a modification of the proposal. I yield.
Okay, thank you. John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to make a substitute motion, and if I can get a second, I'd like to have the floor. So I'd like to make the substitute that we authorize amendment to the general conditions for public works construction to allow the Public Works Director to approve of interim change orders that decrease cost and do not affect cost, period.
Do not increase cost?
That decrease cost or do not affect cost.
Gotcha. Okay, second by Armstrong.
Thank you very much. And I would like to see staff bring this back because I really don't, personally, I don't have an issue with A. I think most everything that's low, and we do see a lot of them, I would have no problem with staff writing off on them. But I'm like Mr. Jones and Councilman Stroman, I think that there should be a limit. You know, I think that we need to see these bigger ones that could possibly come in. And it concerns me. I mean, we've seen some very big projects since I've been on the council, and if you're talking about, you know, like a Civic Center addition that's $100 million, 5% of that's $500,000. I mean, that's a big change order that can go through without any, you know, any of the city residents, council members, you know, knowing about. And I think that for openness and accountability, especially to our constituents, we need to have that. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'll go to Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the great discussion, and just to let you all know, my comfort level isn't at these limits too. I certainly wouldn't think of bringing a very large, or would not bring a very large change order to this body. So I appreciate the amendment, and I think that's a step forward in at least streamlining our process to some degree to our contractors, and we'll move things along quickly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the motion on the floor at this moment then is to allow the Public Works Director to approve of interim change orders that decrease cost or do not affect cost. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, well, Bill Evans, go ahead.
I'm glad to see people are rethinking this. I originally voted no, and I do think it's reasonable to have some minor cost increases. We just need to come up in the future with a reasonable amount that we trust people making these small variations on, a couple thousand here or something. Really doesn't necessarily need to tie up our time. Perhaps run it through the mayor's eyes or the council president's eyes or something. But I think sometime even this, I'll vote yes for this now, but I think we might need to change it again in the future to make things a little bit more streamlined. Oh, and I'm so glad people are changing their mind with me for once. Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, on to what looks to be a community development item, item 43. A request by Indigo Design LLC for DTH LLC for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 1 through 2, lots 1 through 7 of Block 2, lots 1 through 6 of Block 3, lots 1 through 4 of Block 4, lots 1 through 3 of Block 5 of Homestead Vista subdivision, generally described as being located east of Timmons Boulevard and south of Homestead Street, and the recommendation is to approve stipulations. Motion to approve stipulations from Robert, second from Lehman. All in favor of that motion on 43, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 44 is to approve a list of 118 alcohol renewals per verification through the Rapid City Police and Fire Departments. John Roberts made the motion, Stroman second, and we'll go to Pat Jones.
Thank you very much, Mayor. This list is not all-inclusive of every place in town that serves alcohol, so I'm wondering, do other places apply for renewal at different times? Because there's a place that I have a concern about that is not listed on here, so I don't know how far I want to dive into it if they're not up for renewal at this time. They do at very different times, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question then for someone. The Pilot Travel Center, number 918-2783 Deadwood Avenue, does that only impact that place itself, or does that license apply to the restaurant and casino that shares the common parking lot with them?
Well, if it's the same owner, it would apply to the property.
It's a corner pantry now. It used to be Marlin's,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and now it's called Corner Pantry or something like that. 2 Country Market. Thank you. Yeah, Country Market 2, and then there's a casino bar attached to it called Double Nickels or something like that. So I was just wondering if that was all under that same license or if they are under separate ones.
It appears that the casino would have a separate one. Vicki Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Typically, these all require a conditional use permit. When the conditional use permit comes in, the owner of the property would sign the application. If they created additional suites and leased spaces out to other users, that owner still has to sign that amendment to that conditional use permit. And so that license itself would go to the operator, whereas the conditional use permit would sit on the property as a whole. So again, it goes to the use is allowed, but the operation is mandated through that licensing.
So is what we're approving tonight, does that approve the license for that facility, that restaurant and bar and video lottery casino?
Heidi's saying yes, so I'm going to go with that since licensing is through finance.
Because if that's the case, then that's the one that I have a complaint about, and am not comfortable renewing that one. I don't know if it needs to be pulled for further investigation or what, but if that's the case, then I believe we need to separate them out and renew and vote separately, or, I mean, I'll just vote no. Yeah, thank you. So if I may, I'd like to make a substitute motion to remove the license request from Pilot Travel Centers LLC, Pilot Travel Center number 918-2783 Deadwood Avenue, from the approval list, and approve all others.
Okay, we have a substitute motion. Second, was that Pat Roseland? Okay, second by Pat Roseland. Let's go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and it's probably tough to put the police on the spot like this, but if there's a complaint, Mr. Jones, has it gone through the police department, or is this
Yes.
just directly to you?
No, it has. It's gone to the city attorney's office and to the.
City attorney's office and the police,
Yep.
okay. Mr. Mayor, would you mind if I ask the city attorney if he knows anything about this then?
Please do. Joel Landine.
Alderman Jones did approach Chief Hedrick and I and mentioned that while he was dining at the restaurant up at the Deadwood Avenue, that he observed someone smoking in the facility. We told him we could reach out and perhaps talk to them. Weren't aware of other complaints of a similar nature at the business at that time. So, it's really an operational. I guess I would have some concern without having really talked to them. I think the police were going to reach out and just say, hey, you need to make sure that people aren't smoking. It's actually a state law violation to allow smoking in a indoor in a facility like that. So was going to talk to him and just let him know too that in the future, if it continued to be an issue, we would perhaps the PD would look at it as an issue for renewal.
Okay. And Mr. Jones, that's accurate to your
Yes.
concern? Okay.
And I haven't heard anything.
All right.
So that's why.
Well, it sounds fair to me to set it aside and just make sure that we get all the facts straight maybe and bring it back forward when
Maybe the police.
they're ready to go.
If they've interacted with them yet, I don't know.
Maybe they. And would you mind if I have a police department
Please,
weigh in? Thank you.
Captain Becker.
I was going to look into that. I just heard that. I do remember that request going in. I have not heard, so I will look into that and make sure we get back to you.
Fair enough. I yield. Thank you.
Okay. Laura Armstrong.
I just have a question. So what is the procedure now? I don't recall this happening, so what's the next steps? This gets pulled?
I would imagine we would tentatively get this scheduled onto the next council meeting and then get any feedback from the RCPD or other official, get that to the council so they can make an informed decision when it comes time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay? John Roberts.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a question to Vicki Fisher?
Please do.
So Vicki, if we don't renew this tonight, when does their license actually expire? Do you
Mr.
know?
Mayor, I'll
Vicki
have to
Fisher.
defer to the finance department. Again, community development brings forward the conditional use permit. Is this the right location for the use?
Yes, I'm
The
talking
licensing.
about the liquor license,
Oh.
so I'll talk to Aunt. Can you tell me when it expires? Okay. So we have enough time to take this off for a week, and it's not going to disrupt their business. That's what I was concerned about.
Let's hear from Dan Ainsley, City Finance Officer, if I can get him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, if the council does proceed with pulling this one item off, we'll coordinate with the police department to relay whatever information they hear to the council, and then you do have a couple additional council meetings where you could consider that one particular license.
Okay. Back to Pat Jones.
Thank you very much. I don't want to shut this place down or cause them grief. It was shocking to walk to the restroom and smell fresh burning cigarette smoke. And so I poked my head in there and there was someone sitting at a video lottery machine smoking. It's against the law. We voted against it. So it needs to be addressed. And if they're a good business owner and they want to play nice, then they will cooperate. And I have a feeling that they do, and that once it's brought to their attention, they'll take action, because it was most likely an employee that allowed it to take place rather than the management. So I just, happened to be in the right or wrong place at the right or wrong time, but I have a good sniffer and I couldn't let it go by. So I don't want to impact their business or anything like that. I just believe that there needs to be compliance with that because it's important. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor now to approve the list of alcohol renewals with the exception of the one previously stated. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, that was 44. Now, public hearing items 45 through 51. We'll have a public comment period, and we have 2 speaker requests on item 51. The first one is Kurt Korkow. You can approach the podium, sir, and you have 3 minutes to address the council on item 51.
Hello, I'd like to thank the council and mayor for the time to talk. My name is Kurt Korko, and I live at 365 Texas Street in Rapid City here. And we have a couple of concerns with the approved planning commission conditional use permit. And that is one that we would think that there maybe needs to be a modification to it. And the other thing would be that there seems to be kind of a concentration of conditional uses going on in relation to our property, which I think really changes the character of the intended low-density, single-family residential zoning. One of the concerns is when this was being presented in the plan is that the daycare says that they intend, and that it's their intentions and plans not to have more than 12 people, and it's been presented to the neighbors that way. But the plan asks for going up to 20 and is very detailed and going up to that limit. The other thing that hadn't been complied on that is if, even though those plans and intentions are sincere, there could be things that might dictate that it would have to go to that 20. And there would be, I mean, that's toothpaste out of the tube already. It can't be put back in. And believe that we need to look at this as it being a 20-child daycare. The other thing is that it could be that their intentions, but it could also sell. I mean, once this is attached to the property, as I understand it. So the property could sell 3 weeks, 3 years from now. The new people could come in, as long as they're licensed for a registered daycare and follow the guidelines that are already in the conditional use, would be able to step in and go right to the 20 because it's already part of the plan. There's other things too. I know there's a lot of funding going on right now, and it's a great opportunity for daycares in the state with funds that have to be spent from the American Rescue Plan Act. And I just don't think, we need to make sure we don't, because of the rush and trying to get them applied for in 2023, I'm thinking that if those funds come through, that there might be an unintended need to go to 20 because, oh, we missed this in our funding we accepted. We do have to accept up to 20 people. So that's a concern. I'm going to get to the second concern, and that had to do with the density of conditional uses already in our neighborhood. We already have the Cornerstone Mission, which is about 270 feet from my front yard across a watershed retention pond. So that's right in my front yard. And now we've got this, which is going to be 12 to 20, I guess I'm going to say, children that are going to be in our backyard and our neighbors' backyards. And I can't say that I'm not against this. And we got to meet with Jenny, and she's very ambitious. And I really like her ambition. But I think in order to work with the neighbors, that we need to take the success that the Cornerstone Mission has had with their fence that they put in when they expanded. They almost doubled. And we had more sound and issues with them before they doubled. Then after, when they doubled and had the 6-foot fence, we had much less issues when we'd sit out in our front yard. And listen, it's I like to commend the Planning Commission on having worked with that on that expansion there. Because they've turned out to be a good neighbor, and there were concerns when they first came in 10 years ago. And I should have mentioned that we've been in our property for a little over 22 years. And with that, I guess our thing is we'd like to see a 6-foot fence, even though I think it'll provide more safety and security for the children also, besides keeping and mitigating some of the issues that we might have with this conditional use in our low residential single-family density zoning. Thank you very much for your time. And I want to thank Pat for reaching out to me today too, to make sure that he understood what was going on in our ward. Is there any questions that I can answer? Or
we'll get to that item in just a minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second speaker request is Jenny Jimenez.
Hello. Thanks for your time tonight. Yes, I'm Jenny Jimenez, the owner of Little Pumpkins Daycare. And yeah, Rita and Kurt and I had a meeting at my daycare. And I totally understand his, can you hear me well? I feel like it. Okay. I totally understand the fact that he doesn't want the conditional use permit to be transferable. I get that. I agree with him, actually. So if there's something that we can put, that we can add to the conditional use permit that says that it is non-transferable, that's fine with me. I'm not planning on selling the property anytime soon. And if I were, I think it's in the best interest of the community to require a new conditional use permit for a new owner that would have different ways of operating a daycare. And then the second concern that he had regarding the noise in the 6-foot fence that he requests for us, I understand that. I did provide a picture of like our backyard area where they're located like our properties aren't adjacent to each other because the property boundaries don't like meet up with each other. So did you guys receive that? The third page of the letter that I wrote? Okay, that shows there's 20 feet of a rock area in the back of our yard where the kids are not allowed. And it's fenced off. So then they wouldn't be able to go up to the backyard neighbor's fence or even close to Kurt and Rita Corkhouse. But as far as noise mitigation, we've taken several steps to mitigate noise. And keep in mind, we already have a daycare with 12 children. And yes, we are requesting to be licensed as a group family daycare with up to 20 children. And I did let Rita and Kurt know that we're not really planning on getting up to 20 children. It's not required by the state for us to reach that point. But we are requesting a license because it improves the quality of our daycare. We will receive funding to improve the quality of our daycare. And so that's part of the reason why we are requesting licensure, and will be inspected way more often than we currently are as a registered provider. But as far as the noise mitigation goes, we don't have all the kids go out at the same time. We have different age groups of children where we'll have different groups go out at different times, and we are constantly in supervision of the children outside and inside the daycare. We don't allow screaming, inappropriate screaming or yelling. We discourage that with the kids, and you know, like I said, we're always supervising them outside and inside the daycare. Let's see, what else did I put in there about our... I think that's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
No questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you.
When we get to that item, we will stick around.
Okay, that'll close the public comment period, and we'll go on to consent public hearing items 45 through 48. Would there be a motion? Motion to approve Armstrong, second by Lehman. All in favor of approving the consent public hearing items, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Non-consent public hearing items. Item 49, approve resolution 2023-032, a resolution creating a tax increment district boundary, and approve resolution 2023-033, resolution to adopt a project plan for a property generally described as being located at the western terminus of Country Road, west of the intersection of Brook Street. The recommendation is to continue this to the special council meeting on May 22nd. Motion by Lehman to do that, and a second by Stroman, was it? And we'll go to John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to abstain from this.
Okay. All right, motion is to continue to the special council meeting. All in favor of that, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries with one abstention. Item 50, approve resolution 2023-034, a resolution creating a tax increment financing district, and approve resolution 2023-035, a resolution to adopt a project plan for property generally described as being located north of Cloud Peak Drive and Targhee Drive. The recommendation again is to approve continue to the special council meeting May 22nd. Motion by Roberts, second by Stroman. All in favor of that motion say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 51, appeal of Planning Commission's decision on a request by Jenny Jimenez for a conditional use permit to allow child care center for property generally described as being located at 3747 Sonora Drive. We'll go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I direct a question to Director Fisher, please?
Yes, you may.
Director Fisher, one other request that both of the applicant and those providing the appeal have requested is the non-transferable CUP. Is that allowable for us to do that?
Vicki Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the short answer is yes, and we've done that in the past. We haven't done it for a while because it can become a hardship for a future property owner or the one that's trying to sell the property. So a conditional use permit does stay with the property typically. Whoever should purchase it would have to run the business exactly as that operational plan that came in. In this instance, similar to what we've done in some high-density residential where someone wanted to put a dental office, we have said that it's just for this dentist. So we could add a similar step that says any change in ownership or management shall require a new conditional use permit be submitted for review and approval.
Okay, and I think that's reasonable. The other thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on are the fence situation.
So this conditional use permit, and I appreciate that the neighbors got to speak with the applicant, it was submitted to the Planning Commission to allow 20 children. And it was reviewed for that. The parking, the open space in the backyard, the open space inside the building. We are hopeful that in time they will grow this to 20 children. We are so in desperate need of childcare in our community. The regulations require that there be a 4-foot-high fence, a chain link fence is usually what we would see in a childcare or daycare facility around the backyard. They're meeting that requirement. However, there is a criteria that must be met in order for a conditional use permit to show that it is not having a negative impact on our neighborhood, and one of those is noise. So if you've heard testimony tonight that you believe that 12 to 20 children could create a noise issue in that neighborhood, even though the applicant has said that they would limit the number out at one time and they wouldn't allow noise above a certain level, we have seen the Planning Commission and or the City Council in the past require a 6-foot-high screening fence. It can't be in the front yard, but if they just fenced in the backyard, then that would be permitted in this zoning district. It would be a decision for the City Council.
Would it be required over the entire lot or over a section of impacting the neighbor?
My recommendation would be that it be just in the backyard.
But
Let
I
me
mean,
offer this
if there's
up.
3 sides to the backyard, let's say, can it be one side versus all 3 sides? Does that make sense?
If you
Yeah, I
just
don't think
wanted,
so either,
where the neighbors that have shown up this evening are located, you would need it on 2 sides of the lot for them to have that buffer. That looks difficult, then the neighbor that doesn't get it is going to be calling us saying, why don't I get a privacy fence too? You know, one of the things that we could do is add a stipulation that says, if there are noise complaints, that this conditional use permit shall be brought forward for review. And that's similar to what we did when Cornerstone came in with the housing project. I'm so glad you folks reminded me of that this evening. We tried it out on a trial basis. And then when they established it, we reviewed it in 6 months. When they expanded it, they had shown the neighborhood they were good neighbors.
Okay. I think that's some good information. I too want to just say thank you for providing an important service. I mean, it is challenging. I appreciate you're trying to be a good neighbor and they're trying to be good neighbors, and I think that's great. And so I do want to commend you for the really important work that you're doing. I think whatever we do, I hope it's reasonable, and I think Ms. Fisher's given us some things to think about, but I like the way they're approaching it as the appeal, and I like the way that you're approaching it too. I think there's some common ground here. Thank you.
Pat Jones.
Thank you very much, Mayor. You know, this is a bit of a conundrum. We have some very nice people who have concerns and want to move this forward, and they're all in Ward 1, and I very much appreciate and respect what's going on here tonight. I would, to get things moving forward, I'd like to make a motion to put this to the next council meeting to allow time to work these issues out. I don't think we should try to fix this from the dais tonight. I think 2 weeks would allow opportunity for Jenny to figure out what she might like to do with fencing and other things. If Courthouse have any other suggestions or any other neighbors have concerns, this would allow time. This would allow time for community development to come forward with some suggestions. So I'd like to make that motion, and if I can get a second, I'd like to hold the floor.
Okay, we have a second by Bill Evans. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in reading the agenda for tonight, I came upon this issue, and I really didn't know anything about it until then, and then I read everything in there, and then I read the letter from Courthouse that they were going to appeal it tonight. So I did contact them. I wanted to hear more about their appeal, because the email about the appeal was just saying that they were going to appeal it, so I wanted to learn more about it. Jenny, I didn't contact you today because I felt I knew. I read all your stuff in there and everything, so it wasn't like I was trying to play favorites one way or the other. I get everything that you're asking for here. I think the issues on the table are transferable or not. What kind of a fence can be there? As someone who was an educator for 33 years, if you can discourage inappropriate yelling and screaming, there's a special place in heaven waiting for you. Maybe just allow appropriate yelling and screaming. I love that term in there. But I don't think we should try to solve this from the dais. I think these are great people. I applaud you for wanting to go from being a registered daycare to a licensed daycare. There's a lot of hoops there, and this is a golden opportunity to do that. So I support that. But I think there's time for this to be talked about. I really, although it might be a bit of an inconvenience, I don't think 2 weeks would be a burden that would make this not possible to move forward. And I want there to be time for the good people involved in this to have a chance to fix it, and everyone else, and not us just rush a fix from the dais. I think that would be a mistake. I wanted to make sure all these folks were heard tonight, and all the questions that had a chance to be asked, and a resolution come forward in a timely manner, but not rushed from the dais. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion on the table then is to postpone this until the June 5th City Council meeting.
Yes, that's
correct. Okay. Comments on that motion? Laura Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Dr. Jones, I appreciate your cautious approach. If I may, I'd like to ask Miss, I hope I don't butcher your name, Imanis, question, if I may?
Yeah.
Yes.
I do think that we could get this resolved this evening, and I don't know if that's something that we want to do or if we're receptive to pushing it off. On one hand, I think you want to know, you'd like to have a plan. What kind of fencing would you be willing to do? And maybe we can get this rectified this evening. Not that we have to rush, but since we're all here.
Thank you. We currently have a 4-foot chain link fence all the way around the backyard, and that's what I feel is a reasonable fence. I'm against a 6-foot fence because of the fact that the kids can't see out. It feels confining, and we have deer in the area. The kids love that. And really, it's very confining. 6 foot, the kids aren't even close to that tall, and it's just a beautiful view.
Okay.
And we have over 5,000 square feet in our backyard, and like I showed you, there's a rock garden that the kids aren't allowed to go in, and that's almost the entire back rear part of the fence. So then there's 20 feet in between the chain link fence and the the vinyl fence that we have that blocks that off, and so then that just shuts the area off even more, which is what we plan to keep it as. But as far as a 6-foot fence, a privacy fence, I just feel like it wouldn't work. Well, and I have been doing daycare for 20 years, and I've owned this home that I'm in currently, where I run the daycare, for 4 years, and we've never in the 20 years have we ever received any noise or nuisance complaints.
Right. Okay, and I don't want to micromanage your business. I'm sure you're doing a great job. Mayor, may I defer to Vicki Fisher to maybe get
Yes.
her insight on maybe rectifying this tonight, possibly?
Vicki Fisher.
Mayor?
Thank you. So just based on this discussion, I am not sure if continuing it for 2 weeks is going to find solution between the neighbor and the applicant over the fence situation. But I offer up the additional stipulation that we did similar with the Cornerstone, which is that we add a stipulation that says, if a noise complaint is received, the conditional use permit shall be brought forward to the Planning Commission for reconsideration.
Dr. Jones, would that suffice?
Say it again, please.
That if a noise complaint is received, the conditional use permit shall be brought forward for review by the Planning Commission.
And that's being offered in place of my motion?
If that's acceptable to you.
Well, that doesn't address the transferable part.
Yes?
We had already discussed that any change in ownership or management shall require a new conditional use permit be submitted for review and approval.
Well, I just want to make sure, because there's been some time in between. And I want to make sure that we are staying on top of everything that's on the issue, because there's three things on the table. There's the transferable, there's the fence, and, you know, the noise, alleged noise, unauthorized noise. And those are good proposals.
I think what she's saying is she doesn't think that if we continue it, it's really going to change.
Oh, I know what she said.
Oh, okay.
I am processing.
Okay.
It takes a minute, because this is important. I mean, we have the integrity of a neighborhood. We have a neighborhood that's been impacted already by several CUPs. And the more you impact that, the less it becomes a neighborhood, and the more it becomes, you know, CUPville. And is that what we want to happen over there? We have to think about that. You know, how many cars are there each morning at a critical time of the day? You know, is there an impact to that? Is there a peak time of arrival? So there's a lot of things that have to be vetted out here. Maybe those things were at the CUP. I don't know. So if there's a second motion, I guess that's what we need to know.
The motion on the floor now is to defer this to the June 5th meeting. So there are still people in the queue that want to talk on this particular motion, and that is Greg Stroman.
Thank you, Mayor. May I address Ms. Jimenez?
Please.
So would 2 weeks create a hardship for you if we came back in 2 weeks, or is there a timeline on your need to get this through?
Yeah, really there is. But I just wanted to say that he was asking about the pickup and drop-off times and peak hours that parents would be coming. We actually had a plan that Vicki Fisher, you have that, a mitigation plan about how we're going to do that. And that would be where we have staggered drop-off and pickup times, where no more than two families can drop off their children at the same time, and there's 30-minute increments of when they can drop off and pick up. And our pickup and drop-off time, the drop-off times are between 7 and 9 o'clock every day, and the pickup times would be 3:30 to 5:30. And like I said, no more than two families at one time picking up or dropping off. And then they must park in the driveway, in which we provided plenty of parking spaces for that. And we're adding one also. Yes.
And then what are the ages that you take care of?
12 months and up, including after-school care children. Right now, we have 1-year-olds up to age 7. And we take 2 after-school children, and then we have 10 full-time children that are not in school.
Okay, thank you. And may I address Director Fisher also?
Yes.
Vicki, aren't CUPs reviewed every year anyway? Or are they only reviewed if you get a complaint?
They are not reviewed unless they are, either a complaint is received or we become aware that they're not operating in compliance with their approved operational plan.
So is that different from the county then? Is that?
It's very different from the county.
Okay, because I thought it was just an automatic 1 year you had to, okay. I guess based on what I'm hearing, I'm ready to go ahead tonight, but I'll yield for now.
Okay, next up is Jesse Ham.
Can everyone hear me okay?
You're on.
Okay. I agree with Mr. Jones in that definitely 3 separate issues here. One being whether this is going to be a non-transferable CUP, which sounds like it is. A second would be the regulations of a 4-foot versus a 6-foot fence, and what nobody's really mentioned up to this point is the cost of replacing a 4-foot fence with a 6-foot fence, and what would the benefit of that be? My experience has been that the benefit of that would be minimal, given what the concerns are. I don't think that a 6-foot tall chain link fence or even a wooden fence would necessarily contain the noise if that was a real problem. And of course the third is the noise. And my hunch is that from everything I've heard that this business has been very amiable in regard to maintaining the character of the product and the business that Ms. Jimenez has put forward for 20 years now. But my thoughts, considering all these things, lead me to believe that I think we can figure out something this evening and move this forward. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will make the substitute motion to approve the conditional use permit with the 2 following changes. 1, any change in ownership or management will require a new CUP. 2, that if a reasonable noise complaint is received, the CUP can be reviewed regarding the fencing.
Okay, we have a motion by Solomon and a second by Lehman. The motion is to make sure that the conditional use permit is non-transferable and that noise complaints will generate a review of the whole arrangement, correct? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have need a roll call, please.
Roberts. Aye. Stroman. Aye. Armstrong. Aye. Jones. Aye. Lehman.
Aye.
Solomon. Aye. Evans.
No.
Roseland. Aye. Nordstrom. Aye. Ham.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-1.
Okay, thank you. All right, next on the agenda is the bill list, item 52, and for that we'll go to our City Finance Officer, Dan Ainsley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The total bills are $8,763,729.67.
Motion to approve by Nordstrom, second by Lehman. All in favor of approving the bill list, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Motion to adjourn by Lehman, second by Stroman. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.